Today, we're going to look at people's lost footage before being eaten alive by animals. From a drunk man who tried to pet a jaguar to a YouTuber who got too close to a wild bear. Let's dive right into it. It was June 18th, 2016, and the air over Pelican Valley in Yellowstone carried a sharp, resinous scent from the lodgepole pines. Beyond them, a large shape hunched low over a carcass, ready to defend its kill from unwary visitors. Brian Cooper was a 29-year-old warehouse worker from Idaho Falls, known among his friends for his willingness to take dares without much hesitation. Born and raised in Pocatello, he'd grown up fishing with his father but had little experience in true backcountry conditions. The camping trip to Yellowstone with two longtime friends had been planned as a weekend escape, a mix of fishing, hiking, and getting off the grid. Those close to him described him as sociable, quick to make jokes, and rarely inclined to pass up a chance for a story he could retell later. They underestimated how much of a fool he would be that day. They had set up camp in the permitted backcountry zone northeast of Pelican Creek, carrying standard gear and a single canister of bear spray between them. The plan was a short hike out along a meadow trail that morning, keeping near the marked path before turning back for fishing later in the day. The weather was stable, clear skies, temperatures in the upper 60s. About 90 minutes into their hike, they spotted movement beyond a rise. Following the slope down, the three saw a grizzly bear bent over the body of a partially scavenged bison. The distance was roughly 150 feet, close enough to see the lift and fall of the bear's shoulders as it tore into the carcass. Grizzly bears can weigh up to 1,500 pounds and run at speeds of 35 miles per hour, faster than Olympic sprinters. Their massive paws are equipped with claws up to 4 inches long, capable of disemboweling prey with a single swipe. Their bite force of over 1,200 pounds per square inch is enough to crush a bowling ball. These aren't just impressive statistics. They're evolutionary adaptations that have made grizzlies the apex predators of the northern wilderness for millennia. The open meadows spread in a shallow basin between forested ridges. To their left, a narrow drainage cut a line toward the river. There was no wind shift, no cover to mask movement, just open grass. The bear was an adult male, by later estimates weighing 600 to 700 pounds. Grizzlies are apex omnivores, protective of food sources and documented to react aggressively when approached within 300 feet of a carcass. The posted warnings at the trailhead that week have been explicit. Avoid carcass sites, carry bear spray, and back away slowly if a bear is encountered. One of Brian's friends muttered that they should turn back, noting the animal's size and proximity. Brian stepped forward instead, phone in hand, holding it high and calling out toward the bear in an exaggerated, mocking tone. His friends called to him to stop, their voices low but urgent. He glanced back briefly, stupidly grinning, then continued. At about 60 feet, the bear stopped feeding and raised its head. The huff it gave was deep, short, and carried clearly across the grass. It lowered its head slightly, ears forward, a clear warning sign that Brian either didn't recognize or chose to ignore. Brian raised the phone again, angling it toward himself and the bear behind him. He had just shifted his weight forward when the grizzly lunged. The movement was immediate. One moment the bear was still, the next it was charging at full speed. It crossed the ground in less than 2 seconds, covering the distance with shocking velocity. The first impact hit Brian square in the chest, sending him backward into the grass with tremendous force. The bear's forepaws came down hard, pinning him to the ground. Its head lowered, delivering a series of devastating bites to his head and upper torso. The attack was brutal and efficient, each movement calculated to neutralize the perceived threat. His friends screamed and threw rocks from a distance. The attack lasted several seconds before the bear broke contact. turning back toward the carcass. Brian lay motionless in the trampled grass. One friend ran to him while the other fumbled for the bear spray, though the animal had already resumed feeding. Attempts to find a pulse failed immediately. Visible injuries included deep lacerations to the scalp, puncture wounds across the rib cage, and extensive crushing damage to the sternum. There were no defensive wounds on his arms, suggesting he had been unable to shield himself before the initial impact. The Rangers arrived within 40 minutes, having been alerted by another hiking party that heard the desperate shouts echoing across the valley. The carcass site was marked and later closed off for the remainder of the season. The grizzly was not tracked or removed, as officials decided it had behaved in a typical defensive manner when protecting its food source. Brian's funeral was held quietly in Pocatello the following week. Attendance was mostly family and close friends, with no media presence. The park installed additional bear activity signage at the Pelican Valley trailhead within the month, including explicit warnings against approaching wildlife for photographs. His phone was recovered from the grass about 10 feet from where he fell. The screen cracked, but the device still functional. The final image was blurred and chaotic, the frame half filled with his face and the brown arc of the bear's shoulder in the background. It was September 14th, 2018, and the air in Manawas hung heavy with late afternoon heat. The municipal zoo's palm-lined entrance buzzed with the muffled hum of traffic, mixing with the sharp calls of caged parrots. As crowds thinned, a group of young men staggered toward the feline exhibits. Paulo Ferreira leaned against the railing, unaware of the foolish mistake he just made. Paulo was 22, born and raised in Manawas. Unemployed for nearly a year, he'd spent most of his time with a tight-knit circle from his neighborhood, passing hours between bars, pickup soccer games, and occasional fishing trips. Locals knew him for his impulsive streak, often framed as humor among friends, but bordering on reckless when alcohol was involved. He carried a reputation for stupid stunts to draw laughter or prove a point, often inviting someone to record the moment. That afternoon, he and 4 others had been drinking steadily since early lunch. By the time they reached the zoo, Paulo's movements had the loose coordination of intoxication, shoulders swaying, gestures drawn out. The idea began as a passing comment, one friend recalling a video of someone feeding a lion. Paulo raised the stakes immediately. He would touch a jaguar here, today, and collect 100 reais from whoever doubted him. His friends laughed at first, until he started walking toward the jaguar enclosure. Jaguars are the largest cats in the Americas, weighing up to 250 pounds and possessing the strongest bite force of any big cat. Their massive jaws can exert over 1,500 pounds per square inch, enough to crush turtle shells and pierce crocodile skulls. Unlike other big cats that kill by suffocation, jaguars deliver a crushing bite designed to pierce skull or shell, often killing prey instantly with a single devastating attack to the head or neck. The jaguar habitat was a dirt and grass pen, roughly half an acre, with scattered logs and a shallow pool. A waist-high public barrier kept the visitors at least 10 feet back from the inner chain-link fence. Inside, a single adult male jaguar lay half in shadow, tail curling lazily against the ground. The signage around the enclosure was direct. Danger. Do not cross barrier in Portuguese and English. Paulo glanced at the signs without slowing. Witnesses later recalled him stepping over the outer barrier in one motion. One friend raised the phone, the other shouting mixed encouragement and warning. From inside the enclosure, the jaguar lifted its head, its ears angled forward, body sinking low to the ground in a slow crouch. This was the classic hunting posture of an apex predator. Muscles coiled, weight shifted to the hindquarters, preparing for an explosive burst of speed. Paolo moved closer, closing the distance to within 8 feet, knees slightly bent as he leaned toward the chain link. His whistle cut through the enclosure, short and sharp. In a blur of movement, the cat surged forward with shocking speed. The initial contact was at Paolo's right leg. The jaguar's jaws clamped around his calf with bone-crushing force, momentum pulling him against the fence and then dragging him inward through the narrow gap at the gate's base, where keepers passed food trays. Paolo's scream was high and urgent, overlapping with shouts of onlookers. The animal released its grip on his leg, only to seize the back of his neck. The killing bite jaguars used to dispatch prey instantly. Its forepaws braced in the dirt as it began the violent shaking that would prove fatal. 2 zookeepers, alerted by the crowd's noise, ran to the scene. One carried a slab of meat from the nearby kitchen, waving it toward the cat in an attempt to draw its attention. The other shouted for the public to step back. Paolo's legs kicked once, then still. His shirt had pulled up toward his shoulders, revealing deep gashes along his side where the jaguar's claws had raked across his torso. The jaguar kept its jaws locked until one keeper managed to wedge the meat between its forelegs. The cat backed off a few paces, head low, watching as the keepers pulled Paolo away. The attack had lasted less than 30 seconds, but idiocy had taken its toll. Medical staff on site attempted resuscitation within minutes, but the injuries were too severe. The neck wounds had severed major vessels, and massive blood loss had occurred within minutes. The absence of a pulse was noted almost immediately. Authorities later confirmed death by cervical trauma and exsanguination. Police took statements and seized all recorded material as evidence. In their official statement, zoo authorities emphasized that the animal would not be euthanized, as the incident had been provoked, and the jaguar's behavior was consistent with its natural instincts. The zoo closed the jaguar exhibit for a week, adding a second row of steel bars in front of the visitor railing before reopening. Paolo's funeral in Manaus was closed casket, held 2 days later at a small chapel near his family's home. Attendance was limited to relatives and a few neighbors. His mother declined all interviews, her grief too profound for public consumption. It was November 26, 2014. The day began warm and dry in Limpopo. At the entrance to the private safari park, guests queued for their guided drives, unaware that one of the resident lionesses would not remain a distant photo subject for long. Brenda Whitaker, 44, had arrived 2 days earlier from Manchester, England with her husband Alan. Both were seasoned travelers, having visited Egypt, India, and Kenya in recent years. Friends described Brenda as bold, sometimes to the point of overconfidence, especially around wildlife. She liked to say she had a way with animals, citing memories of feeding stray cats in Marrakesh or getting close to elephants in Sri Lanka. What the sheer foolishness of Brenda's actions failed to account for was the reality of the apex predator she was about to face. African lions are among the most powerful big cats on Earth, with females weighing over 400 pounds and possessing 10 times the strength of an adult human. Their massive jaws can exert 650 pounds of pressure per square inch, enough to crush bone instantly. Most critically, lions are ambush predators with lightning-fast reflexes, capable of covering 20 feet in a single bound and reaching speeds of 50 miles per hour in short bursts. Their vehicle for the morning was a modified open-sided 4x4 with 3 rows of bench seating and a canvas canopy with a local guide in the driver's seat. From the outset, his instructions were clear. Remain seated, keep arms and cameras inside, and keep all windows closed. The animals are not tame, he reminded them, and they don't know you're just here for photos. The group entered the park just after 9. After 40 minutes, the guide turned toward a shallow valley known for its lion pride. A lioness lay stretched on the short grass, head resting on her forepaws. She was an adult in prime condition. The guide eased the vehicle to a stop about 20 feet away. Cameras lifted, shutters clicked. Brenda, seated along the left side, unbuckled and leaned toward the side panel. The driver cautioned her to stay back, but she reached for the manual window crank, rolling it down until nothing separated her from the open air. She raised her DSLR, tilting it for a clear line of sight. Witnesses in the back row reported that Brenda foolishly began making soft, high-pitched kissing sounds toward the lioness. The cat's head came up immediately, eyes narrowing, ears locking forward. These warning signs, the direct stare, the forward-facing ears, the sudden alertness, are part of a lion's natural communication system that precedes an attack. In the wild, these signals warn other animals of imminent danger, but humans often misinterpret them as curiosity rather than the predatory focus they actually represent. Brenda shifted her weight, leaning halfway out, lens trained directly on the animal. Alan told her to sit back. She replied that she was just getting a better shot. The lioness rose in one fluid movement. Her body stayed low, shoulders rippling under her coat, the short distance between them closing far faster than most people in the vehicle seemed to register. The first contact was the head thrust, her muzzle driving through the window space, followed instantly by jaws locking around Brenda's throat. Lions typically kill large prey by suffocation, clamping their powerful jaws around the throat and cutting off air supply. This technique, perfected over countless generations, ensures a quick kill that minimizes the predator's risk of injury from struggling prey. The force was enough to pull her upper body clear of the vehicle. Her feet braced against the floor in reflex. Alan grabbed his wife around the waist, pulling hard, but the lioness anchored her hindquarters, dragging backward. The tearing was audible, flesh, fabric, and tendon parting under the sustained bite pressure. Brenda made a choking sound that collapsed into silence within seconds. The guide shouted and fired a warning shot into the air. The lioness released only after 2 more backward tugs. Brenda slumped against Alan, blood running down her front. The vehicle turned sharply, accelerating toward the nearest ranger station. Another guest pressed a towel to the wound, but the bleeding was catastrophic. Minutes passed by, and by the time they reached the park clinic, she was unresponsive. A staff nurse pronounced death at 10:14 a.m. Park management called local police to take statements and secured the scene. The lioness was identified as one of the dominant females of the pride, known for avoiding vehicles unless provoked. Rangers emphasized that her behavior matched natural predatory reflex once the perceived boundary between human and habitat was crossed. She was not euthanized and continued to roam the reserve. Alan chose to have his wife cremated in South Africa. The process was handled quietly, without public memorial at the park, and her ashes were flown back to Manchester the following week. UK news outlets carried brief stories on the incident, often referencing similar attacks in other parks, but without publishing graphic details. The valley where the attack occurred remains part of the lion viewing route, but the guide who drove that morning has since left the park. It was April 8, 2013, and the forest of Kibale National Park in Uganda hid more than just mist and birdsong. Beneath the dripping canopy, a silverback gorilla, the kind that can crush bone with a single bite, would, before the day was over, turn raw power against a human. Samuel Pride was a 31-year-old English teacher from Calgary, Canada, who had been volunteering at a rural school near Fort Portal for 6 months. He had come to Uganda seeking life experience before committing to graduate studies back home. Colleagues remembered him as energetic, humorous, and occasionally impulsive. When he learned that guided treks to see wild chimpanzees and habituated gorilla groups were offered in Kabale, he booked a spot immediately, eager to return with stories for his students. Mountain gorillas are among the strongest primates on Earth, with adult males weighing up to 440 pounds and possessing the strength of 10 adult humans. Their massive arms span 8 feet, and their bite force exceeds 1,300 pounds per square inch, enough to crush bone instantly. Despite being habituated to human presence, these animals retain all their wild instincts and territorial behavior. A silverback's charge can cover 25 feet in under 2 seconds, and their displays of dominance often involve life-threatening violence. That morning, Samuel joined 7 other visitors at the park headquarters. Their guide, a veteran tracker named Moses, gave the standard safety briefing about maintaining a minimum distance of 23 feet from gorillas, speaking in low voices, avoiding eye contact with silverbacks, and most importantly, never feeding or attempting to touch any wildlife. Moses explained that the feeding ban wasn't just about preventing aggression, but also stopping transmission of human diseases. Samuel nodded along and signed the waiver with the rest of the group, but later admitted to another visitor that he thought the rules were more for city tourists who panicked too easily. The trek began mid-morning. The forest floor was littered with half-chewed fruit and fresh dung, signs the gorillas were near. Within 40 minutes, the group encountered a small family unit resting in a dappled clearing. At its center sat the silverback, massive, barrel-chested, with sun glancing off the silvery gray fur across his back. He watched the group with deliberate stillness, his dark eyes calm but assessing. The trekkers formed a loose semicircle, cameras quietly clicking. Moses reminded them in a whisper to maintain their distance. Samuel stood toward the front, his day pack slung loosely over one shoulder. Then, in a move that could only be described as incredibly stupid, he unzipped his pack and pulled out a ripe banana, as if the explicit safety briefing minutes earlier had been optional background noise. While the others concentrated on photographing a juvenile climbing a nearby tree, Samuel seemed determined to ignore every warning he'd been given. One witness later recalled Samuel grinning before underhand tossing the fruit toward the silverback. It landed short, rolling once on the leaf litter. The reaction was instantaneous. The silverback surged forward in a low chest-forward charge, emitting a deep guttural roar. Most of the group instinctively backed away, but Samuel froze, his hands half raised in a futile gesture of surrender. The gorilla closed the distance in less than 2 seconds. With one massive arm, he seized Samuel by the upper arm, his grip crushing bone and muscle. In a single motion, he flung him to the ground as though tossing aside a branch. Before Samuel could rise, the silverback delivered a stamping blow to his chest. The silverback then sank his teeth into Samuel's left shoulder before dragging him several meters toward the undergrowth. His vocalizations were short, explosive grunts, warnings to the rest of the group to not interfere. Moses and the other ranger reacted by producing wild celery leaves, shaking them while making soft hooting sounds, a distraction technique sometimes effective with habituated gorillas. When the silverback hesitated, Moses threw the leaves to one side, creating space between the gorilla and Samuel. After a tense few seconds, the silverback released his grip and retreated toward the rest of his group, resuming his watchful stillness as though nothing had occurred. Samuel lay motionless, his shirt shredded, his shoulder bleeding heavily. His breathing was shallow, lips pale from blood loss. The The nearest ranger station was nearly an hour's hike away, and there was no road access for vehicles in this part of the park. The group improvised a stretcher from branches and jackets, but within 20 minutes of the attack, Samuel lost consciousness from massive blood loss and internal trauma. Despite continuous pressure on his wounds during the desperate journey back, Samuel was pronounced dead by park medical staff upon arrival. The Ugandan Wildlife Authority conducted a brief internal review, concluding that the attack was a direct consequence of feeding behavior in violation of both briefing instructions and park policy. The silverback had acted within normal bounds of territorial defense when approached with unfamiliar food. Samuel's body was transported to Compilation for repatriation to Canada. His family declined interviews, requesting privacy. At the school where he had taught, local staff and students held a small memorial. The park chose not to issue a public press release, fearing that coverage of a fatal gorilla encounter could deter ecotourism, a major source of revenue for surrounding communities. It was July 17, 2016. It began clear and hot over Oahu. The summer water temperature hovered near 80 degrees Fahrenheit, ideal for swimmers and divers, but also prime conditions for sharks, which often patrol the deeper edges of the reef during this time of year. Jason Tully was a 27-year-old handyman based in Honolulu, known among friends for being competent in the water but more of a recreational snorkeler than a seasoned hunter. That weekend, he agreed to join two friends, both experienced spearfishers, for an afternoon dive off the windward coast. The plan was casual: swim out from a small cove, take a few fish for dinner, and return before sunset. The men met at the beach around 1 p.m., rigging gear under the shade of ironwood trees. Jason borrowed a short spear gun from one of the others, along with a mesh catch bag meant for storing fish during the dive. As they checked equipment, one friend named Kaleo reminded Jason of a standard safety practice: keep your catch bag in the boat or float it well away from your body. Speared fish bleeding into the water act like a dinner bell for predators. Jason nodded, but minutes later, in an act of either stupidity or forgetfulness, he clipped the bag to his belt anyway. The first hour passed without incident. They moved along the outer edge of the reef, diving to 20 and 30 feet, surfacing between drops. Jason managed to land two small parrotfish, and later a larger goatfish. Blood seeped into the bag, trailing into the water as he swam. By the time they decided to turn back toward shore, his mesh sack was noticeably heavy, its contents still dripping. Kaleo warned him again, gesturing at the bag and telling him that was asking for trouble. Jason laughed it off, saying they were nearly done. However, Jason wasn't familiar with the predators in these waters. Tiger sharks are among the ocean's most dangerous predators, growing up to 18 feet long and weighing over 1,400 pounds. Their serrated teeth can slice through bone and cartilage with ease, while their powerful jaws exert crushing force. These apex predators possess an extraordinary sense of smell, capable of detecting blood in the water from miles away. It was 3:40 p.m. when the encounter happened. The three were in about 40 feet of water, sunlight still penetrating clearly. From below, rising from deeper blue into the paler reef zone, a large form appeared, moving with slow, deliberate sweeps of its tail. At first, the friends thought it was a reef shark, common in the area. But as it came closer, its massive head and blunt snout became unmistakable. This was a tiger shark, easily 12 feet long, with the distinctive vertical stripes faintly visible along its flanks. The shark's path was direct, its head slightly angled toward Jason. The trail of fish blood in the water left no ambiguity about its target. Both friends shouted through their snorkels, motioning for Jason to drop the bag. Instead, he began thrashing his fins in an instinctive attempt to back away. The movement sealed his fate. The shark accelerated from a slow cruise to a sudden burst of speed, jaws opening. It struck broadside, clamping across his hips and lower abdomen. Jason was yanked downward, his spear gun spinning away as the shark carried him several feet below the surface. Kaleo dove after him, jabbing the shark's flank with the tip of his spear. The other friend did the same, striking at its gills. The shark released Jason, circling out of sight for only seconds before turning back. Its second strike was aimed higher, catching him across the midsection. This time it held on, twisting slightly before letting go and disappearing in the deeper water. Jason floated motionless. The water around him was clouded with blood. His friends struggled to keep his head above water while swimming toward shore, but even with adrenaline driving them, the swim was slow. They reached the shallows nearly 15 minutes later, dragging him onto the sand. A local fisherman ran to call emergency services from his truck, but by the time paramedics arrived, Jason had no pulse and showed no signs of breathing. Efforts to resuscitate him on the beach failed, and he was pronounced dead at the scene. The Department of Land and Natural Resources dispatched officers to survey the area. A brief statement was issued the next morning, confirming that a fatal shark bite had occurred off Oahu's windward side, that the victim had been spearfishing, and that standard safety protocols were not followed. They advised divers to store catches away from the body and to be alert during late afternoon hours, when visibility changes and shark activity sometimes increases. Jason's funeral took place 4 days later at a small church in Honolulu. Fewer than 30 people attended, mostly relatives and close friends. His parents, who had flown in from the mainland, declined interviews. The service was short. The eulogy focused on his humor. It was September 18, 2015, and the air along the creek banks of Katmai National Park held the sharp edge of early cold. The rivers, swollen from recent rain, ran fast and brown, weaving through a vast sprawl of gravel bars where death waited patiently in the shadows. Jason Firth was a 29-year-old former Army mechanic from Twin Falls, Idaho, who had built a modest YouTube following with solo survival videos. His channel averaged a few thousand views per upload, mostly from hobbyists and preppers drawn to his calm, gravel voice narration and deliberate editing style. Unlike the flashy adventure influencers who dominated the platform, Jason focused on what he called real conditions: cold weather shelters, minimal gear, off-trail travel through some of America's most unforgiving wilderness. This trip to Katmai was meant to be his most ambitious project yet. A week-long solo trek through the backcountry with no tent, just a tarp and a bear canister. He flew in by bush plane 3 days earlier, logging his route with rangers who warned him of heightened brown bear activity during peak pre-winter feeding. Coastal brown bears can weigh over 1,000 pounds and possess strength 20 times that of an adult human. Their massive claws, up to 6 inches long, are designed to tear through flesh and bone with devastating efficiency. Their bite force exceeds 1,200 pounds per square inch, enough to crush a human skull like an eggshell. These aren't just impressive statistics. They represent millions of years of evolutionary perfection in the art of killing. Jason's final day of footage was shot near a narrow creek off the Savanoski River. He appeared calm, whispering into his microphone about respecting the distance between predator and man. He pointed to an alder thicket across the creek, explaining how bears use such cover for concealment. Behind him, the water moved fast and shallow, its constant murmur masking the approach of the beast. He remained crouched near the bank, facing downstream, completely unaware of the massive predator approaching from behind. There was no warning growl, no prolonged stalking behavior. Just the sudden rush of a 900-pound coastal brown bear bursting from the alders less than 30 feet away. Jason spun toward the sound, startled, shouting once as he scrambled to his feet and stumbled backward. The uneven gravel betrayed him, and he fell. In that moment of vulnerability, his fate was sealed. The bear closed the distance with shocking speed, covering the ground between them in seconds. Jason kicked desperately as the massive predator reared up, but his efforts were futile against such overwhelming power. The first swipe of the bear's paw sent him sprawling onto his side, dust and moss lifting from the disturbed ground. The bear pinned Jason with its massive forelimbs and began the methodical process of killing. Its first bite pierced deep through his left shoulder and collarbone, crushing bone and severing arteries. Another bite clamped along the base of his jaw, the bear's teeth penetrating skull and brain tissue. Jason's left hand reached desperately toward the bear spray canister on his hip, but it was never deployed. The animal shook him once before biting again. The sounds captured on the recording were brief but haunting. Heavy breathing, broken gasps, the sharp crack of ribs, and the scrape of gravel under shifting weight. The attack lasted under 30 seconds, but those moments contained a lifetime of terror and pain. When it was over, the bear simply left Jason's mangled body and disappeared back into the brush from which it had emerged. Blood soaked into the gravel as his GoPro continued recording for another 4 hours, powered by an external battery pack, documenting nothing but the growing stillness of death. When Jason missed his scheduled satellite check-in 2 nights later, rangers launched a ground search. They located his camp upstream, a tarp shelter partially collapsed, food properly sealed in an untouched bear canister, GPS unit lying atop a waterproof map. Following trail markers from his notepad, they discovered the tripod the next morning, still upright like a monument to his final moments. His body was found nearby, partially buried in disturbed soil and leaf litter. Evidence suggested the bear had briefly returned after the initial attack, possibly to cache the remains, a natural behavior that transforms human tragedy into mere biological function. Officials determined the encounter was defensive, a close-range surprise meeting likely triggered by Jason unknowingly positioning himself near a bear trail or feeding zone. No baiting, food rescue, or improper storage were discovered. Jason had followed all the protocols, respected all the warnings, and still died. The bear was neither tracked nor euthanized. It had simply acted according to its nature, defending territory or responding to perceived threats with the lethal efficiency that had kept its species alive for millennia. Jason's remains were flown out under ranger escort, transferred through Anchorage to Boise, and finally home to Twin Falls. His parents handled arrangements quietly. The funeral attended by family, 3 fellow veterans, and a handful of subscribers who had followed his journey from the beginning. National Park authorities confiscated Jason's camera and hard drive shortly after recovery, citing the need to prevent the footage from being leaked or misused online. Officials later confirmed the video would remain sealed out of respect for the family and to avoid fueling sensationalism around a predatory event that was, by all evidence, a tragic accident rooted in proximity and instinct. It was February 14, 2017, and the late afternoon sun sat low over Lake Victoria, turning the bay's surface to gold. Reed beds lined the shoreline, masking the presence of one of Africa's most efficient killers lurking just beneath the surface. Dylan Morales was a 25-year-old backpacker from Costa Rica who had been traveling across East Africa for 2 months, filming low-budget nature vlogs for his growing YouTube channel. His subscriber count hovered around 2,200, but he had cultivated a reputation for placing himself in remote environments with minimal preparation. His videos featured a loose, unpolished style that viewers found authentic. 1-minute intros, handheld walkthroughs, and long takes of him interacting with nature in unscripted, often reckless ways. Dylan's stated goal was to film what real wilderness feels like up close, but he had no formal background in biology or regional ecology. He trusted instinct and improvisation over expertise, a philosophy that would prove fatal in the predator-rich waters of Lake Victoria. What Dylan likely didn't understand was the ancient killing machine that ruled these waters. Nile crocodiles are deadly ambush predators, growing over 16 feet long and delivering bone-crushing bites over 3,000 psi before drowning their prey. Once they clamp onto prey, they employ the death roll, rapid spinning designed to disorient, dismember, and drown victims in seconds. That morning, Dylan had arrived in a fishing village near Entebbe and spent time talking with local children and fishermen. An older man gutting tilapia near his canoe had warned Dylan explicitly not to swim in the bay. He pointed toward the reeds and explained that crocodiles move through the area regularly, taking goats and sometimes children. Dylan laughed and waved off the concern, brushing it off with a casual, "It's just a rinse. Nothing's gonna grab me in waist-deep water." By 5 p.m., the light was soft enough for filming. Dylan positioned his camera just beyond the high water mark, preparing to shoot what he described as a bathing sequence inspired by local villagers. Shirtless and barefoot, he carried a bar of soap in a small bucket, intending to demonstrate how people washed in the lake. Unlike villagers, who typically stayed near the reeds or used enclosures, he stepped out farther alone for a better camera angle. 3 village boys watched from shore as he waded deeper into the murky water. The shallow edge of Lake Victoria slopes gently into dark, weed-choked depths where visibility drops to 0 beyond a few feet. This environment provides perfect hunting conditions for Nile crocodiles, allowing them to approach prey completely undetected. Dylan moved slowly through the water, adjusting his stance as he splashed his face for the camera. He kept glancing back at his tripod, gesturing with his left hand while narrating softly in his mixture of Spanish and broken English. The water around him appeared calm and harmless, giving no indication of the massive predator that had been tracking his movements since he first entered the lake. This was likely a mature male exceeding 12 feet, a size capable of attacking large mammals and even overturning dugout canoes. Then Dylan screamed. The sound was sharp and brief, a single high-pitched cry that transformed into a grunt as he was suddenly pulled backward and down. Water surged violently around him as a long tail and part of a broad back surfaced for less than a second before disappearing again. The crocodile clamped onto Dylan's right side just under the ribs, its massive jaws penetrating deep into his torso. The initial bite alone would have caused catastrophic internal damage, crushing ribs and puncturing vital organs. Dylan twisted once in the water, his body responding instinctively to the unimaginable pain, before the crocodile began its death roll. This spinning technique, perfected over millions of years of evolution, serves multiple purposes. It disorients prey, tears flesh from bone, and ensures drowning by keeping victims underwater. Dylan's arm reached above the surface briefly during the violent rotation, but he didn't scream again. The crocodile rolled with him in a wide arc before both predator and prey vanished beneath the surface. The camera, still recording from shore, captured the panicked voices rising as witnesses realized what was happening. One man waded in waist deep but saw nothing in the murky water. Another shouted to check farther down the reeds. But within a minute, an eerie silence had returned to the bay. Authorities called by the natives arrived at dusk to find Dylan's tripod and backpack abandoned on shore. His camera still powered on and recording. A review of the footage confirmed that the attack had occurred within seconds of Dylan turning toward shore, with no prior warning signs visible. No ripples, no fin, no surface breach. Just flat water, then sudden explosive violence. Dylan's body was found the next morning in papyrus reeds, legs missing from mid-thigh and his torso showing signs of massive trauma. Punctured ribs, crushed tissue, and deep tearing consistent with a crocodile's jaws. Remarkably, his face remained intact, preserving his identity for the grim task of repatriation. Local police marked the case an accidental death and filed a brief incident summary. Officials posted a handwritten sign near the bay warning of crocodile danger, but no patrols or removals followed. In this region, such attacks were uncommon but not unusual. The predator had acted on instinct, and life moved on. Dylan's family in San Jose held a private funeral, requesting that footage of the attack not be circulated. His YouTube channel fell silent, a digital monument to the dangers of treating nature as entertainment rather than respecting it as the domain of perfectly evolved killers. No camera angle can prepare you for what rises silently from murky water, or crashes headlong through firelight in the dead of night. In Romania, one man's minimalist shelter offered no protection from the massive boar already circling his camp. It was November 4th, 2016, and a thin crust of snow covered the valley floor in Romania's southern Carpathians, where ancient forests concealed predators that had terrorized humans for millennia. Cold wind moved through bare beech branches, stirring dry leaves and waves along the ground, while something massive moved beyond the firelight. Ian Campbell was a 34-year-old Canadian with a forestry degree who had worked trail maintenance jobs in British Columbia before launching a modest YouTube channel focused on primitive shelter building and cold weather survival. His content was slow-paced and instructional, attracting just under 4,000 subscribers, mostly hobbyists and DIY enthusiasts drawn to his calm, thorough approach to wilderness skills. This trip to Romania was meant to elevate his channel to the next level. Ian had chosen the Carpathian wilderness for its thick forest cover, large carnivore populations, and lack of foot traffic in late fall. He packed light to stay mobile and true to his channel's minimalist ethos, with only a tarp, hatchet, camera equipment, and basic food supplies. Notably, he carried no firearm or deterrent, a deliberate choice to showcase survival without modern defenses, even in terrain known to harbor large predators. By his third day in the wilderness, light snow had begun to fall as Ian established camp in the shelter valley rimmed with pine and hornbeam. He constructed a lean-to against a fallen trunk, dug a shallow fire pit, and collected dead wood from higher ground. Around sunset, he filmed a segment near his fire, speaking softly about the animal scat he had discovered throughout the day before signing off. His camera remained mounted on a motion time-lapse rig, pointed at the shelter throughout the night. At 2:07 a.m., the first rustling sounds began just beyond the fire circle. The audio captured Ian's voice, abrupt and commanding, telling something to get away. The movement quickened as a thick-bodied shape entered the frame from the left, a massive wild boar, its outline bulky and menacing in the flickering firelight. This was likely an old solitary male, driven from a sounder during the November rutting season when competition for mates makes boars particularly aggressive and unpredictable. These dominant individuals often exceed 440 pounds and are known to travel alone, highly territorial and prone to confrontation. They can possess powerful necks and razor-sharp tusks up to 8 inches long. These massive omnivores have poor night vision, making them easily startled and prone to violent defensive attacks when they feel cornered or threatened. Ian sat up in his sleeping bag, grabbing a thick stick from behind his shelter as the boar advanced with jerky, agitated movements. The animal snorted and stamped, displaying the classic warning signs of an imminent attack that Ian either didn't recognize or couldn't properly respond to in his vulnerable position. He shouted again, louder this time, and struggled to stand while still partially trapped in his sleeping bag. The boar charged, covering the distance between them in seconds. Its razor-sharp tusks caught Ian mid-thigh, the impact lifting him slightly before knocking him backward to the ground. The initial gore likely severed his femoral artery, causing massive blood loss that would prove fatal within minutes. Ian hit the frozen earth hard, screaming once in pain before attempting to crawl away from his attacker. The enraged boar spun and attacked again, this time driving its snout and tusks into Ian's lower torso with bone-crushing force. The camera footage blurred as the tripod was knocked sideways during the violent struggle, but the audio continued recording the sounds of Ian's agony. His screams were short and broken, punctuated by groaning as the massive animal continued its assault. Wild boars kill by goring, trampling, and rapid blood loss. Their tusks inflict deep wounds, while their weight can crush bones and organs. Ian's last audible sound came at 2:09 a.m., a sharp intake of breath that stopped suddenly as death claimed him. The entire attack had lasted less than 2 minutes. His body was discovered 2 days later by a volunteer ground team conducting a grid search along a stream bed below a ridge. They spotted the torn remains of his sleeping bag first, then followed a short trail of blood and churned leaves to where his body lay. Forest rangers followed tracks from the campsite through a nearby thicket and located the responsible boar feeding on the remains of a previously killed deer. The animal showed no fear when approached, displaying the aggressive confidence of a dominant predator. After confirmation of its involvement in Ian's death, the approximately 500-pound boar was shot and removed from the area. Scarring on its shoulders indicated a history of violent encounters with other males during territorial disputes. Romanian authorities handled the incident quietly, sending only a brief notice to the Canadian embassy in Bucharest. His remains were cremated and returned to Vancouver, where friends and family remembered him as a passionate outdoorsman who had simply encountered nature's darker reality. At his family's request, his YouTube channel was taken down weeks later, leaving only archived clips scattered across forums. The lean-to he built stood for months afterward, a fading reminder that in nature's domain, humans remain vulnerable to the predators that still rule the wild. It was August 2nd, 2018, and the sea off Molokai South Shore churned with the remnants of a tropical system that had pushed sediment into the shallows, creating perfect conditions for one of the ocean's most efficient predators. The water ran cloudy in streaks of green and brown, reducing visibility to mere feet as something massive moved beyond the reef shelf. Evan Nishida was a 27-year-old part-time barista from Hilo who had a small YouTube following with his gear review and spearfishing channel. His content focused on affordability, highlighting entry-level equipment for recreational fishers and young freedivers just starting out. Evan never claimed to be an expert. He had grown up near water but mostly dove close to shore in familiar jetties and tide channels. This trip to Molokai was meant to mark a new phase in his channel's development. He had recently received a sponsorship box from a budget spear manufacturer and wanted to field test the new pole spear on video. His plan was to shoot a solo diving segment while his two friends remained on shore to handle drone footage and provide safety spotting from the rocks. That morning, several locals had commented on the dangerous visibility conditions. Rain from the previous day's storm had stirred up the seabed, creating the murky water that tiger sharks exploit for hunting. Tiger sharks grow up to 16 feet and 1,400 pounds. Their massive jaws contain rows of serrated teeth specifically designed for tearing flesh and bone. Unlike smaller reef sharks, tiger sharks are opportunistic hunters that actively patrol shallow waters, especially during periods of poor visibility when their prey cannot detect their approach. A lifeguard had warned Evan directly to stay high in the water column if he planned to film, explaining that sharks become more aggressive when they cannot see clearly. Evan nodded but made no adjustment. He later told a friend through a call that he thought the lifeguard was being overly cautious, and that staying near the reef would give him the lighting and close-up shots he needed. With a new gear sponsor expecting footage that week, he felt pressure to deliver something dramatic, even if it meant ignoring the advice. He entered the water just after 10:15 a.m., wearing a GoPro chest mount and carrying only a short fiberglass pole spear, a primitive tool better suited for small reef fish than fending off large predators. The reef shelf where he began diving was relatively shallow at less than 8 feet. but it dropped off sharply around 40 yards from shore into the deeper hunting grounds where tiger sharks patrol for prey. Evan filmed several test shots and narrated a segment about spear tip attachments, his tone casual and focused as he drifted over darker patches of reef. At 10:24 a.m., a lifeguard sitting 100 yards away spotted a large, dark shape moving through the water. Using binoculars to watch the shelf's edge, he noticed a single splash followed by a fast-moving form cutting just beneath the surface, heading directly toward Evan's position with predatory intent. The recovered GoPro footage captured the exact moment of the attack with horrifying clarity. The tiger shark emerged from the lower right side of the frame, fast, silent, and massive. Evan turned at the last second, his arm shifting to raise his spear in a futile defensive gesture. The shark clamped its jaws around Evan's right flank and stomach with bone-crushing force. The initial bite alone would have caused catastrophic internal damage, severing arteries and crushing organs. Evan's scream was cut short as the massive predator wrenched him violently through the water, blood exploding across the camera lens as the shark performed a brief death roll before releasing its grip. Evan surfaced once, gasping desperately for air. He attempted to swim toward the reef's edge, but his movements were already weakening from massive blood loss and trauma. The shark, following its predatory instincts, returned almost immediately for a second attack. Tiger sharks rarely abandon prey once an attack begins, and in murky water their aggression intensifies. The scent of blood triggers a feeding response that overrides caution, driving them to pursue wounded targets relentlessly. The second strike was captured as the GoPro was knocked downward, showing Evan's chest now covered in blood while his swim kicks became increasingly erratic and weak. The camera recorded a final moment of bubbling water and muffled cries before falling silent at 10:26 a.m., documenting the end of a life in less than 2 minutes of savage violence. The lifeguard reached the scene 2 minutes later, but it was far too late. Evan's body floated face down near the drop-off, his right arm missing below the elbow and his torso showing massive trauma, including evisceration and deep tissue loss, consistent with sustained feeding behavior. Paramedics were called by the lifeguard. Arriving 10 minutes later, they performed triage on the sand but declared him dead at 10:38 a.m. The Hawaii Department of Land and Natural Resources confirmed the bite pattern as consistent with a subadult tiger shark, likely measuring 10 to 12 feet in length. No culling efforts or increased patrols followed the attack, as officials recognized it as unprovoked predatory behavior during normal feeding patterns. Evan's funeral was held 6 days later in Hilo, attended by extended family, co-workers, and a small group of local divers who had followed his videos. At his parents' request, the YouTube channel was taken down within a week, with a brief statement posted thanking viewers and urging caution for others who venture into wild waters. It was June 25, 2014, and the gravel roads near the northern boundary of a private reserve in Limpopo lay dry and silent. Sparse acacia thorns cast long, jagged shadows across the roadside scrub, while something big and lethal watched from the dense thorn belt beyond. Martin Dupont was a 31-year-old French expatriate with a low-profile wildlife content channel known mostly among ecotourism followers and travel vloggers. He had volunteered in South Africa during his 20s, working at a rehabilitation camp near Kruger, an experience that had given him a loose network of local contacts and a dangerously romantic notion of African wilderness. By 2014, he had returned with borrowed gear and about 5,100 subscribers, chasing viral fame through increasingly reckless encounters with apex predators. Martin's videos feature dramatic titles like tracking alone after dark and sleeping next to a lion, but his actual footage was quiet and meandering, lacking the professional polish that might have justified the risks he took. He was pursuing an idea more than a coherent format, raw personal proximity to animals that could kill him without effort or remorse. This trip to Limpopo wasn't sanctioned by any legitimate wildlife organization. Martin had paid a local game drive operator off the books to bring him to a seldom-used road outside a reserve where lions were known to cross during the colder months. His goal was to capture himself at eye level with a lion in soft focus, believing that just one 30-second viral clip could transform his modest channel into internet stardom. The operator, a Sangha man in his 50s who had worked in game areas for years, had warned Martin repeatedly about the dangers. He emphasized the importance of staying in the vehicle, avoiding the grass line, and never crouching near brush where predators could approach undetected. Martin nodded at each warning, but evidently dismissed the concerns. In one of his videos, he claimed that lions were shy creatures that wouldn't attack unless provoked. At 10:42 a.m., Martin stepped out of the idling vehicle and placed his tripod 10 feet ahead, aiming the lens toward a low ridge of elephant grass. His plan was to frame himself against the open bush, creating the intimate wildlife footage that he believed would make him famous. The recovered footage showed him moving back and forth between camera and vehicle, adjusting focus and testing distances while wearing a faded khaki shirt and soft boots that muffled his steps. His confidence in his ability to read animal behavior and maintain safe distances would prove to be a deadly miscalculation. A lioness had already been watching from the elephant grass, employing the patient stalking behavior that made her species successful for millions of years. Lions use stealth and camouflage to deadly effect, remaining unseen in tall grass until the moment they strike, covering distances up to 50 feet in mere seconds. Females weigh up to 300 pounds and possess the strength to bring down prey many times their size. Martin crouched at his tripod height to align a shot, unknowingly triggering the lioness's predatory instincts. In the wild, crouching behavior often signals vulnerability or injury, making it an irresistible trigger for hunting cats. His low posture and focused attention on his camera equipment left him completely unaware of the massive predator positioning herself for a killing strike. The lioness charged from less than 30 feet away, covering the distance in seconds. Martin never had time to turn around or react to the approaching threat. The massive predator struck him across the back with both front paws, her claws extended and her full weight behind the impact. The blow knocked Martin face down onto the gravel with bone-crushing force, stunning him and making any escape attempt impossible. The lioness immediately clamped her powerful jaws around the side of his neck and shoulder, her 4-inch canine teeth penetrating deep into vital structures. The lioness then dragged Martin's body several meters into the brush, following the instinctive behavior that helps lions protect their kills from scavengers. The entire attack lasted less than 40 seconds. The operator, unarmed and alone, could only radio for help and drive away at speed to find assistance. By the time rangers arrived 20 minutes later, the lioness had vanished back into the reserve, leaving behind Martin's mangled corpse partially hidden under brush. His throat had been torn open by the lioness's powerful jaws, while deep punctures marked his shoulder and upper back where her teeth had penetrated. Dragging abrasions on his legs showed how she had moved him into concealment. Forensic examination confirmed death within seconds due to catastrophic cervical trauma. The lioness was identified by her tracks but left undisturbed, as she had remained within the unfenced reserve perimeter and shown no evidence of repeated predatory behavior toward humans. Officials classified the incident as a clear result of human error. Martin's body was flown back to France within the week, and his funeral was held in a small chapel outside Lyon, attended by family, a few former co-workers, and 2 wildlife colleagues from his early volunteer days. At his family's request, his YouTube channel was quietly deactivated to prevent the footage from becoming exploitative or misused. It was August 23, 2018. In the dusty heat of the Tulsa State Fairgrounds, where the scent of hay and livestock hung heavy in the August air, 17-year-old Miguel Rivas stood proudly beside his prize Charolais bull. The massive ivory-colored beast, weighing nearly 1,900 pounds, had been Miguel's project for months. He called him Titus. Miguel came from 3 generations of ranchers. Though his father had left the business years ago for construction work, Miguel carried the family tradition with pride. What began as simple chores, mucking stalls and hauling feed, had blossomed into genuine passion. By 16, he was handling bulls, not the bucking rodeo stock, but show bulls valued for their build and temperament. Friends and teachers often described him as intensely focused, sometimes too focused. When something mattered to him, Miguel didn't hesitate. Whether it was a stubborn gate latch or a panicked animal, he had a habit of stepping in before fully assessing the danger. His mother once said he had tunnel vision with a hero complex, a tendency to lock onto the problem in front of him and block everything else out. That same impulse had earned him respect in the show ring, but it also made him reckless in the wrong moment. Titus was a magnificent specimen, a broad-chested Charolais bull with a thick neck and seemingly placid eyes. Miguel had spent countless hours halter training him, walking him before dawn, brushing his coat until it gleamed like polished bone. The bond between them seemed unbreakable. On August 23, 2018, Miguel brought Titus to the fairgrounds with practiced confidence. He unloaded the bull into a temporary aluminum pen beneath the series of loudspeakers used for announcements. The morning passed in routine preparation, bathing, grooming, and chatting with fellow handlers. But something was off. Titus shifted restlessly, muscles twitching beneath his short fur. Miguel had to tug the halter repeatedly just to keep him facing forward. A judge remarked on how calm the bull seemed despite his size. Miguel nodded, but deep down, something didn't feel right. Titus's ears flicked nervously at every sound. His tail swished faster than usual. Miguel gave reassuring pets and massages, but Titus wasn't responding like he used to. Then came the sound that would change everything. A sharp, shrieking squeal from the overhead speaker system. Feedback from a poorly connected microphone pierced the pavilion like a siren, slicing through the layered noise of the fairgrounds. The crowd froze. So did most of the animals, but not Titus. Bulls, especially those of the Charolais breed, are known for their size, strength, and surprising bursts of speed when startled. Though typically selected for their docile temperament in show settings, Charolais bulls can weigh between 1,800 and 2,400 pounds and possess the muscular power to cause catastrophic damage in seconds. A startled bull can reach speeds of up to 25 miles per hour and has a remarkably low flight distance, meaning they may react violently to sudden noises or perceived threats in close quarters. In Miguel's case, the high-pitched audio feedback acted as a trigger, flipping the bull's instinct from calm to panic in a flash, and the lightweight pen offered no meaningful resistance. The bull jerked violently, eyes wide, nostrils flaring. His entire body seemed to coil in a split second, like a spring yanked to its limit. In one powerful surge, the aluminum bars of the pen twisted like tinfoil. The structure collapsed with a deafening clang, and Titus exploded into the open aisle. Miguel didn't think he reacted. It was the same instinct he'd followed since he was a kid. Fix the problem, stop the danger, take control. He had been the one to calm Titus when a storm rolled in last spring, the one to stand his ground when the bull panicked at the sound of a lawnmower. In his mind, this was just another moment where Titus needed him, and beyond the instinct was guilt. Miguel had trained him, chosen this location, tied him in that flimsy pen. If Titus hurt someone, it would be on him. He believed, truly believed, that his presence could stop it. So as the crowd screamed and scattered, as parents yanked their children behind trailers and handlers dove behind gates, Miguel stepped into the aisle directly into the bull's path. His heart pounded, but his hands were steady. He called out softly, "Titus," just like he had every morning before feeding, his voice cutting through the chaos. He raised his arm, not in fear, but in a signal that the bull had responded to hundreds of times. But Titus didn't see a trainer, he didn't hear a familiar voice. He saw movement, he saw a shape, and his body was still locked in panic. The bull charged. He covered the distance in seconds, hooves thundering against the concrete. Miguel barely had time to flinch. Titus slammed into him at full speed, lifting him off the ground with the blunt force of a freight train. Miguel's body twisted midair and struck the concrete with a sickening crack. He didn't move. Gasps rippled through the onlookers, but it wasn't over. Titus spun back, eyes wild with terror, and gored Miguel in the side. The horn tore into his abdomen, lifting his body like paper. A second toss followed, more violent than the first, flinging Miguel sideways as the bull's hooves stomped dangerously close to his head. Shouts of "Get back!" and "Grab the gates" echoed across the pavilion as handlers finally managed to redirect Titus toward a closed trainer, using feed buckets and steel panels like shields. Medics arrived within minutes, and though Miguel was barely alive, they worked fast to keep his heart beating. In the ambulance, they pressed hard on the wound to his stomach, gave him fluids, and did everything they could to stop the bleeding. At the hospital, doctors rushed him straight into surgery. His belly was full of blood, and they found a major artery torn, along with damage to his liver and spleen. He had already lost almost half of the blood in his body. The surgical team gave him emergency blood transfusions and tried to stop the bleeding, but his blood pressure kept dropping. Then fluid started building up around his heart, making it harder to pump, something doctors call cardiac tamponade. They opened his chest to relieve the pressure, but the injuries were just too severe. Less than 45 minutes after reaching the hospital, Miguel's heart stopped. The doctors tried everything, chest compressions, electric shock, but he was gone. In the days that followed, grief swept through the Tulsa ranchers' community. Miguel's stall turned into a quiet memorial draped with flowers, ribbons, and handwritten notes. Fellow competitors left behind halters and belt buckles in tribute. The fairground committee launched a full review, and new safety regulations were quickly implemented. Reinforced steel pens became mandatory for large livestock, and aluminum fencing was banned for animals over 1,500 pounds. Leaders spoke of his work ethic, calm leadership, and devotion to his animals. Some said he died doing what he loved. Others whispered that no teenager should ever be that close to a bull. His death sparked real change. Policies were rewritten, safety briefings expanded, and structures rebuilt with risk in mind. But for those who were there that day, for the parents who pulled their children back, for handlers who heard the speaker squeal before the chaos, it's more than policy, because danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits, quiet, patient, until the moment it charges. It was January 12, 2022. In the day's early hours, the Paraiso Valley Dairy in Fresno County, California, became the site of a horrific workplace tragedy. What began as a routine morning for Raul Ortega in one of the region's largest dairy operations would conclude in a terrifying end. Raul was no novice to dairy work. At 28 years old, he had spent over a decade mastering the delicate dance between man and beast in industrial agriculture. Born to field workers in Bakersfield, Raul had earned respect through his tireless work ethic and problem-solving abilities. Though not officially a manager, he was the one who trained newcomers and handled the complex machinery that kept the operation running. The Paraiso Valley Dairy housed nearly 1,800 Holstein cows, each animal passing through the rotary milking system daily in a precisely choreographed routine. Raoul understood the subtle language of these massive creatures, how to move among them without triggering alarm, how to anticipate their movements, and how to maintain the calm atmosphere essential to dairy production. At 4:38 a.m., Raoul stood inside the holding pen, guiding the first group of 40 cows into position for the morning milking. The air was cold, filled with the familiar sense of hay and manure. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the concrete floor as the massive black and white Holsteins shuffled forward. What happened next would change everything. A newly installed vacuum pump, one that Raoul had flagged just days earlier for making unpredictable high-pitched noises, suddenly emitted a piercing mechanical shriek. It wasn't a slow build or a groan of warning, it was a sharp metallic scream like steel teeth grinding against each other at high speed. The noise tore through the cavernous barn, bouncing off the corrugated metal walls and amplifying into something that sounded like a machine exploding. To human ears, it was unbearable, but to the hypersensitive hearing of the cows, it was a sonic assault. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Holstein dairy cows may appear docile, but these are not small animals. Weighing between 1,200 and 1,500 pounds each, they become lethal when panicked in confined spaces. Their wide-set eyes give them nearly panoramic vision, but at the cost of depth perception, making them prone to sudden reactive movement when startled. Combined with their strong herd instinct, even a few frightened cows can trigger a chain reaction of chaos. In a narrow alley or milking lane, a frightened herd doesn't scatter, it surges. When these animals bolt, their momentum is nearly impossible to stop. The sharp turns and steel gates of a barn become hazards rather than boundaries, and anyone caught in the path, no matter how experienced, is suddenly fighting against thousands of pounds of muscle and confusion. The first row of cows bolted forward. One slipped on the wet concrete and crashed sideways into the metal gating. This triggered a chain reaction as 36 terrified animals surged backward and sideways, creating a chaotic mass of thrashing hooves and massive bodies. Raoul, trapped in the middle of the holding pen, had nowhere to escape. He attempted to reach a side gate, but the space was too tight and the animals too frenzied. As he wedged himself near a feed bin, a cow slammed into him from behind, knocking him onto the concrete floor. What followed was a horrific sequence. A hoof crushing his thigh, another striking his ribs, and then the full weight of a panicked cow dropping onto his body. Raoul's consciousness flickered as hooves continued to strike around him. The sickening sound of bones breaking mixed with the continued screeching of the malfunctioning pump. By the time co-workers managed to shut down the system and clear the pen, Raoul had suffered catastrophic injuries, a shattered leg, broken ribs, and severe internal bleeding. The paramedics arrived shortly after and worked feverishly for 27 minutes, administering 4 units of blood plasma, performing emergency chest decompression, and attempting 3 rounds of cardiac resuscitation. But the catastrophic internal injuries had already caused irreversible damage to his vital organs. Despite emergency responders' efforts, Raul Ortega was pronounced dead at the scene, his body broken beyond recovery. The investigation confirmed what many had already suspected. The faulty vacuum pump that Raoul himself had reported was the trigger for the deadly stampede. The authorities launched a full inspection and had the facility shut down for a year for renovation after seeing other substandard conditions. The accident at Paraiso Valley Dairy is a grim warning. Working with massive animals in tight spaces can turn deadly in seconds. Even skilled workers don't stand a chance when machinery fails and 1,000-pound cows panic. Now, in dairy barns across California's Central Valley, workers move differently, sharper, more cautious. They know even the calmest cow can become dangerous when scared. A broken gate, a sudden noise, and the same animals they milk every day can turn into uncontrollable forces. It's a reminder that no matter how familiar the routine, one wrong moment can change everything. It was February 17, 2023. Under cover of the Montana sky, a tragedy unfolded that would remind us all of nature's raw, unforgiving power. The wind carved dry lines across the eastern plains as Henry Cale Morgan, age 62, a lifelong rancher, tightened his worn leather gloves and prepared for what would be his final morning at Gray Ridge Ranch. Raising bison wasn't just a job to Henry, it was a calling that ran generations deep. His great-grandfather had worked this same land before the Dust Bowl, and Henry had taken over after his father's stroke in the late 1980s. Where others saw danger, Henry saw nobility. Where others used machines and teams, Henry preferred working alone. Just a man and his animals in silent understanding. Each of his animals had a name, though he rarely spoke them aloud. He knew their patterns, their moods, their limits. The largest of them, a 6-year-old breeding bull weighing close to 2,000 pounds, had been especially difficult in recent months. More aggressive, less predictable. But Henry's confidence never wavered. Spring on Gray Ridge Ranch brought the usual challenges: thawing mud, fence repairs, and the biannual transfer of breeding males. That Monday morning, construction crews were installing hydraulic gates on the east paddock, creating unfamiliar chaos for animals that preferred silence and routine. Henry disliked using trucks for transfers. He preferred walking the bulls along the old spit rail corridor himself, giving them space and a clear route. It had worked dozens of times before. The bull, internally tagged as B-17, had been pacing since dawn. The sound of construction made him uneasy. When Henry entered the pen that morning, radio clipped to his belt, he noticed the twitching ears, the low, chuffing breaths. Still, he proceeded. A worn steel gate creaked open. The bull snorted, hooves cracking frozen dirt beneath him. A full-grown bison can reach impressive speeds of up to 35 miles per hour, a startling feat given their massive size. Adult males can weigh as much as 2,300 pounds and have the ability to accelerate from a standstill to this speed in just 6 seconds. Bisons possess muscular necks that support their enormous heads, which function like battering rams used during mating season headbutting contests to establish dominance and in defense against predators such as wolves, bears, or rival bulls. Their aggression in the wild is swift and decisive, often preceded by warning signals like deep growls and raised tails, and they can leap obstacles up to 6 feet high. Injured or provoked bison do not hesitate to charge, as seen in a Yukon incident where an animal thought to be down suddenly rose and fatally charged a hunter before collapsing. These factors combine to make bison not only symbols of raw power and agility, but also a potent reminder of the dangers they pose when their space is invaded or underestimated. What triggered the next moment remains unclear. Perhaps it was the sudden metallic bang from a dropped tool or a loose piece of tin flapping in the wind. Maybe it was just primal instinct. What is known, confirmed later by the corral's motion-activated camera, is that in less than 2 seconds, the bull wheeled around with terrifying precision. He charged. And Henry turned too late. The bull hit him squarely in the chest, lifting him off the ground and slamming him into the side rail. A crunch of ribs echoed off the metal. He dropped, twisted unnaturally, but the bull wasn't finished. 2 more thrusts of the massive head drove him deeper into the dust and hay. It was all over in under 10 seconds. The construction crew didn't hear the attack through their work noise, but an intern retrieving a toolbox spotted the bull pacing near the bloodied rail just minutes after the fatal charge. At first, he thought the animal had cornered something, maybe a trapped calf or a downed gate. But when he stepped closer, he froze. The shape on the ground wasn't scrap metal or equipment. It was Henry. His limbs were still, one boot half off, his shirt soaked dark with blood and dirt. The intern dropped the toolbox and ran, shouting for help. He sprinted back to the main crew and grabbed the foreman's radio, stammering through the emergency call. Moments later, two of the men cautiously approached the corral's edge. One called Henry's name repeatedly, but there was no movement, no groan, no lift of breath. The bull watched them in eerie silence, still pacing in slow, methodical loops, his heavy sides rising and falling, his eyes unreadable. They didn't dare enter, not without tranquilizers. Sheriff's deputies arrived 30 minutes later, their convoy winding up the gravel road while the crew waited in anxious silence. By then, the bull had grown still, standing alone in the center of the corral, calm again, as if the violence had been erased. Deputies kept their distance, assessing the scene before deciding to sedate the animal from behind the gate using a dart gun. It took 2 hits before the bull wobbled, lowered its head, and finally collapsed on his side with a muffled grunt. Only then did the responders enter. Henry's body was found in a shallow depression near the east rail, his chest crushed, face turned toward the horizon. He was declared dead then and there. The bull was relocated to a secluded, secure pasture away from the main herd and human activity, monitored closely for signs of aggression. Ranch experts believe the attack was triggered by environmental stress rather than the bull's nature. Henry's family and the ranch community held the private memorial at the Gray Ridge homestead, honoring his lifelong dedication to the land and animals. Those who knew him carried his memory in stories passed down around campfires and quiet moments in the fields he loved. Bison are often romanticized in American culture, symbols of wild freedom and ancient strength. But behind those noble silhouettes is raw force that humans can never truly tame. September 15th, 2021. The dense forests of Rutland County, Vermont were experiencing peak autumn transformation. The maple and birch trees displayed brilliant reds and golds, creating a picturesque backdrop that drew content creators seeking dramatic footage for their channels. Kyle Merritt, a 28-year-old YouTuber from Burlington, had built a modest following of 45,000 subscribers on his outdoor adventure channel, Vermont Wild. Known for his fearless approach to wildlife encounters, Kyle specialized in creating content that pushed the boundaries of outdoor exploration. His videos often featured close encounters with Vermont's native animals, earning him both praise and criticism from viewers concerned about his safety practices. Kyle had driven 3 hours south to explore remote trails near Mount Tabor, planning to film his latest episode titled Tracking Vermont's Black Bears. He carried professional camera equipment, including a GoPro chest mount and handheld stabilizer, along with his basic hiking supplies. Notably absent was bear spray, which Kyle had dismissed in previous videos as unnecessary for black bear encounters. His girlfriend knew his planned route and expected return time. The morning air was crisp at 42 degrees when Kyle began his solo hike, already recording his introduction segment. The forest was unusually quiet as Kyle narrated his journey for his audience. Black bears are North America's most common bear species, with Vermont hosting an estimated 6,000 individuals. Adult males typically weigh between 200 to 400 pounds and can run up to 30 miles per hour. During autumn, they enter hyperphagia, consuming up to 20,000 calories daily to build fat reserves for winter hibernation. Their bite force measures approximately 400 to 600 pounds per square inch. While generally avoiding human contact, bears become aggressive when surprised, cornered, or protecting food sources. At 2:30 in the afternoon, Kyle was filming bear tracking signs when he spotted fresh claw marks on a tree. Excited by the discovery, he moved closer with his camera, narrating his findings. A large male black bear estimated at 340 pounds had been foraging nearby and detected Kyle's presence. The bear emerged from the undergrowth just 15 feet away. Kyle's immediate reaction was to continue filming, his confidence bolstered by previous successful encounters with a mountain lion in New Hampshire and a pack of coyotes near Lake Champlain that had earned him over 200,000 views each. Those viral videos had taught him that staying calm and keeping the camera rolling during wildlife encounters was the key to both safety and subscriber growth. Kyle believed this bear encounter would create his most viral content yet, drawing on the same fearless approach that had made him Vermont's most daring outdoor YouTuber. The bear, agitated by Kyle's proximity and equipment sounds, perceived the continued camera approach as threatening. When Kyle stumbled backward over a fallen branch, the sudden movement triggered the bear's defensive instincts. The animal charged with explosive speed. The initial impact sent Kyle crashing to the forest floor as his camera flew away. The 340-pound bear landed on Kyle's chest, immediately fracturing multiple ribs. The animal's first swipe across Kyle's face and neck caused devastating lacerations, with claws over 2 inches long tearing through skin and muscle down to bone. Kyle's attempts to protect his head resulted in severe defensive wounds to both arms. The bear's powerful jaws clamped around his left shoulder, delivering a crushing bite force that shattered his collarbone and severed major blood vessels. The animal shook its head violently, causing massive tissue damage and arterial bleeding. As Kyle weakened from blood loss, the bear continued its assault on his torso. Multiple rib fractures punctured his left lung, causing internal bleeding and respiratory distress. The bear's claws raked across Kyle's abdomen, penetrating the abdominal wall and causing fatal internal injuries. Kyle lost consciousness from severe blood loss, traumatic brain injury, and respiratory failure. He died within minutes from multiple traumatic injuries. Kyle's body was discovered the following morning by Vermont State Police after his girlfriend reported him missing. His camera equipment was found scattered around the attack site, with his GoPro still recording when discovered. Vermont Fish and Wildlife officials closed the trail system and launched an investigation into the state's first fatal black bear attack in over 2 decades. The bear was tracked and euthanized 3 days later after being identified through DNA evidence. Kyle's final footage provided investigators with crucial evidence about the attack sequence. His YouTube channel was memorialized by his family, who used the platform to promote wildlife safety education. The incident sparked debate within the outdoor content creator community about the ethics of pursuing dangerous wildlife footage for social media engagement. Kyle's death served as a sobering reminder of the risks involved in extreme outdoor content creation. August 15, 2019. The crystal-clear waters off Guadalupe Island, Mexico promise the adventure of a lifetime. Located 150 miles southwest of Ensenada, this remote volcanic island has become world-renowned as one of the premier destinations for great white shark cage diving. The nutrient-rich water surrounding the island created a perfect ecosystem that attracted massive populations of elephant seals, which in turn drew some of the largest great white sharks on the planet. Jake Ruiz, a 34-year-old marine biology enthusiast from San Diego, had been planning this trip for over 2 years. His wife Talia, 31, shared his passion for marine life despite her initial fears about sharks. The couple had saved meticulously for this once-in-a-lifetime experience, booking with a reputable dive operator known for their safety protocols. Jake worked as a high school science teacher and often spoke to his students about the importance of shark conservation. This dive represented the culmination of his lifelong fascination with apex predators. The morning conditions were ideal, with calm seas and visibility extending over 100 feet. The dive boat had anchored in the traditional spot where the continental shelf dropped dramatically, creating the perfect hunting ground for great whites. Other tourists aboard the vessel watched excitedly as crew members prepared the aluminum diving cages, checking the air supply lines and testing the communication systems. Great white sharks are the ocean's most formidable predators, capable of reaching lengths of over 20 feet and weighing more than 5,000 pounds. Their torpedo-shaped bodies can propel them through the water at speeds exceeding 35 miles per hour. Armed with rows of serrated teeth that can exert bite forces up to 4,000 pounds per square inch, they are perfectly evolved killing machines. Their keen senses allow them to detect electrical fields generated by living creatures and smell blood from miles away. At Guadalupe Island, great whites display particularly aggressive feeding behaviors, often breaching completely out of the water when attacking seals. The island's population includes some of the largest specimens ever recorded, with several individuals measuring over 18 feet in length. Jake and Talia entered the cage together during the afternoon session when shark activity typically peaked. The rectangular aluminum cage measured approximately 8 feet by 6 feet, with gaps between the bars designed to allow clear photography while keeping divers safe. Both wore standard scuba gear with surface-supplied air systems connected to the boat above. Within minutes of submersion, a massive female great white, estimated at over 17 feet long, appeared from the murky depths. The shark initially showed typical investigative behavior, circling the cage at a distance while the couple marveled at its size and grace. The crew above began using bait to encourage closer approaches for better viewing. The situation deteriorated rapidly when the shark became increasingly agitated by the bait presentation. During one aggressive pass at the suspended tuna head, the massive predator struck the cage with tremendous force. The impact bent several of the aluminum bars inward, creating a gap large enough for the shark to partially enter. Jake was positioned nearest the compromised section when the shark's head pushed through the opening. The animal's powerful jaws clamped down on his torso just below the rib cage. The serrated teeth penetrated deep into his abdomen, severing major blood vessels and causing massive internal trauma. The shark's thrashing movements inside the confined space created additional lacerations across his chest and arms. Talia, trapped in the same cage, was struck by the shark's powerful tail as it attempted to extract itself. The impact crushed several ribs and caused severe internal bleeding. The shark's continued struggles to escape the cage resulted in further injuries to both victims, as they were battered against the metal bars. The surface crew immediately began emergency procedures to extract the cage, but the shark's presence made any rescue attempt extremely dangerous. By the time they managed to raise the cage to the surface, both Jake and Talia had succumbed to their injuries from massive blood loss and trauma. Mexican maritime authorities launched a comprehensive investigation into the incident, focusing on cage construction standards and safety protocols. The dive operator voluntarily suspended operations pending the investigation's completion. The tragedy sparked renewed debate about the safety of cage diving operations and led to stricter regulations for shark tourism activities in Mexican waters. October 12, 2020. The dense forest of Cougar Ridge Provincial Park in British Columbia stretched endlessly under an overcast autumn sky. Located in the remote wilderness of the Coast Mountains, this 15,000-hectare park was known for its pristine, old-growth forests, rugged terrain, and abundant wildlife. The towering Douglas firs and western red cedars created a cathedral-like canopy that filtered sunlight into dappled patterns on the forest floor below. Daniel Cho, a 30-year-old YouTuber from Vancouver, had driven 4 hours north to reach this secluded location. His channel, Daniel in the Pines, attracted 10,300 subscribers who appreciated his unique blend of quiet forest walks, poetry readings, and philosophical reflections about finding peace in nature. Working part-time at a downtown bookstore, Daniel used his days off to venture into British Columbia's wilderness, seeking what he called stillness in a loud world. For this trip, Daniel planned to film a 2-night series titled Disappearing into the Trees, bringing only essential gear, a single camera, a lightweight hammock, and cold sandwiches. He intended to document his complete disconnection from modern life, camping alone in one of the park's most remote sections where few hikers ventured. Cougars are North America's largest wild cats, capable of reaching 8 feet in length and weighing up to 200 pounds. These solitary hunters possess incredible stealth, moving silently through dense forest terrain with retractable claws and powerful hind legs that allow them to leap 40 feet horizontally. Their amber eyes provide exceptional night vision, while their acute hearing can detect the slightest movement from hundreds of yards away. Female cougars with cubs are particularly territorial and aggressive, viewing any perceived threat as cause for lethal force. Daniel arrived at his chosen campsite around 4 in the afternoon, setting up his hammock between 2 massive cedars. As dust settled over the forest, he positioned his camera and began recording a poem about silence and solitude. Unknown to Daniel, his camera captured movement on the ridge behind him, a tawny form watching from approximately 100 meters away. The female cougar had been tracking Daniel's scent since his arrival. With 2 young cubs hidden in a nearby den, she perceived the human's presence as a direct threat to her offspring. Throughout the evening, she maintained surveillance from various positions, using the dense undergrowth and fallen logs as cover, while gradually closing the distance to Daniel's camp. At 10:30 in the evening, Daniel recorded his video journal, noting strange sounds outside his tarp. He dismissed the noises as likely deer movement, unaware that the cougar had positioned herself within 50 meters of his location. His GoPro, set to capture time-lapse footage of the night sky, continued recording as Daniel settled into his sleeping bag. At 2:12 in the afternoon, the GoPro captured a blur moving beyond the dying firelight. The cougar had spent hours circling the campsite, testing Daniel's awareness and planning her approach. A shadow crossed the camera lens as the predator moved into position for her final assault. The attack began with devastating speed and silence. The cougar launched herself from a fallen log approximately 15 feet from Daniel's hammock, covering the distance in a single bound. Her 140-pound body struck Daniel with tremendous force, her claws extending to grip his torso, while her powerful jaws clamped down on his neck and skull. Daniel's startled cry was immediately muffled as the cougar's bite crushed his cervical vertebrae and severed major blood vessels in his neck. Her canine teeth, measuring over an inch in length, penetrated deep into his throat, causing massive trauma to his trachea and carotid arteries. The force of the initial impact knocked him from his hammock onto the forest floor. The predator's hind claws raked across Daniel's chest and abdomen, creating deep lacerations that tore through his clothing and into muscle tissue. Her front paws pinned his shoulders while she maintained her crushing bite on his neck, shaking her massive head to inflict maximum damage. Blood poured from the puncture wounds as Daniel's body convulsed involuntarily. The cougar's powerful jaw muscles continued applying pressure, fracturing Daniel's skull and causing catastrophic brain trauma. Within 30 seconds, the combination of blood loss from severed arteries and oxygen deprivation from his crushed windpipe rendered Daniel unconscious. His body went limp as the predator maintained her grip, ensuring the threat to her cubs was eliminated. When Daniel failed to check in with his roommate as planned, search and rescue teams were dispatched to Cougar Ridge Provincial Park. They discovered his campsite on October 14th. Finding his camera equipment intact, with the lens cracked but still functional. Daniel's body was located 60 meters from his original campsite, where the cougar had dragged him after the attack. The recovered footage provided clear evidence of the stalking behavior and attack sequence. Wildlife officials confirmed that tracks and scat samples indicated a female cougar with cubs in the immediate area. The animal had acted on maternal instincts to protect her offspring from perceived danger. March 22, 2018. The remote backwaters of the Florida Everglades became the scene of a horrific tragedy that would expose the deadly consequences of social media stunts gone wrong. The vast wetland ecosystem, spanning over 1,500,000 acres, harbors one of nature's most formidable predators, the American alligator. Troy Lockett, a 26-year-old aspiring content creator from Homestead, Florida, had been struggling with his YouTube channel, Bayou Blunders. With only 3,600 subscribers, Troy specialized in chaotic Southern-style wildlife dares and redneck humor filmed throughout Florida's marshes and backroads. His videos featured increasingly dangerous stunts, like catching venomous snakes bare-handed and wrestling wild boars, all in pursuit of the viral moment that would launch his television career. That humid Thursday afternoon, Troy drove to a secluded roadside swamp pull-off along the Taimai Trail, armed with a cooler full of raw chicken and dreams of internet fame. He had scouted this location previously, noting several large alligators that frequented the murky waters near the road. His plan was simple but reckless. Film himself feeding 3 wild gators raw chicken from a stick. American alligators are apex predators that have remained virtually unchanged for 200 million years. Adult males can reach lengths of 14 feet and weigh over 1,000 pounds, with jaw muscles capable of generating crushing forces exceeding 2,100 pounds per square inch. These ancient reptiles are opportunistic feeders and ambush hunters. When habituated to human feeding, they lose their natural fear and become increasingly aggressive in pursuing food sources. Troy set up his smartphone camera, propping it on a red lunchbox positioned on the muddy bank to capture the perfect angle. He grabbed his cooler and a long wooden stick, wading into knee-deep water while addressing his future audience with characteristic bravado. Troy shouted, his voice echoing across the still swamp as he impaled the raw chicken thigh on his makeshift feeding pole, announcing that it was time to see who was hungry today. The first alligator appeared within minutes, a 7-foot female that glided silently toward the scent of fresh meat. Troy held the stick extended, allowing the reptile to snatch the chicken with a powerful snap. Emboldened by success, he prepared another piece as a second gator, slightly larger than 8 feet, emerged from the opposite direction. As Troy stepped deeper into the murky water for better camera angles, he failed to notice the massive shape lurking motionless among the thick reeds behind him. A 12-foot male alligator weighing nearly 800 pounds had been watching the commotion with predatory interest. This ancient bull had been illegally fed by previous visitors for years, conditioning him to associate humans with easy meals and making him dangerously aggressive. Troy tossed another chicken thigh toward the second gator when his foot slipped on the slimy bottom sediment. He stumbled backward, arms flailing as he tried to regain balance, splashing loudly in the shallow water. The sudden movement and noise triggered the massive bull's attack instincts. The enormous alligator exploded from the reeds with terrifying speed, covering 15 feet in less than 2 seconds. Its massive jaws clamped down on Troy's left leg just above the knee with bone-crushing force, instantly shattering his femur and severing major blood vessels. Troy's agonized screams pierced the air as the predator began its signature death roll. The powerful reptile spun Troy's body violently through the water for nearly 20 seconds, each rotation causing additional fractures. The alligator's conical teeth ripped through muscle, tendons, and arteries. Troy's left leg was nearly severed at mid-thigh, held together only by strips of mangled tissue. Blood poured into the dark water as Troy thrashed desperately, his screams becoming weaker with each passing moment. The massive gator maintained its grip while repositioning for a better hold, its teeth now clamped around Troy's torso just below the rib cage. The crushing pressure fractured multiple ribs and punctured his lungs, making breathing impossible. As Troy's struggles weakened from massive blood loss, the alligator dragged him toward deeper water. The other two gators, attracted by the blood and commotion, began circling the area. The final moments came when the massive bull repositioned its jaws around Troy's upper torso and neck. The immense pressure crushed his cervical vertebrae and caused severe brain trauma. Troy's body went limp as the alligator continued its death roll, tearing away large sections of flesh. The smartphone continued recording for 14 agonizing minutes, capturing Troy's screams gradually fading to silence, followed by sounds of splashing water and occasional grunts from the feeding alligators. Troy's disappearance wasn't reported until Monday when he failed to show up for work. His truck was discovered at the remote pull-off by Florida Highway Patrol, along with his smartphone still propped on the lunchbox. Recovery divers found Troy's dismembered remains scattered across the swamp bottom 3 days later. March 15, 2019, Riverside County, California. The sprawling 40-acre property in the desert hills of Riverside County had once been home to exotic animals used in Hollywood productions. Now retired, the facility served as a sanctuary for aging performers, including several chimpanzees that had spent decades in the entertainment industry. The compound featured reinforced enclosures, medical facilities, and specialized housing designed for animals transitioning from show business to retirement. Melinda Hart, a 34-year-old documentary filmmaker from Los Angeles, had spent months negotiating access to create her passion project about retired circus animals. Her previous work focused on animal welfare, earning her recognition in independent film circles. The sanctuary's owner, believing Hart's documentary could raise awareness about proper animal retirement care, granted unprecedented access to film interviews and interactions with the facility's most famous residents. That morning, Hart arrived with minimal crew, just herself and a cameraman, to conduct what she called an interview with Caesar, a 28-year-old male chimpanzee who had appeared in numerous commercials and films throughout the 1990s and early 2000s. The plan involved Hart sitting outside Caesar's enclosure while asking questions, creating an artistic piece about communication between species. Chimpanzees are humanity's closest living relatives, sharing approximately 98.8% of human DNA. Adult males can weigh between 88 and 130 pounds, with arm spans reaching up to 7 feet. Their strength is legendary, estimated to be 4 to 6 times stronger than humans of comparable size. In the wild, chimpanzees live in complex social hierarchies where displays of dominance often involve aggressive behaviors, including biting, hitting, and territorial attacks. Caesar had been removed from his mother at 6 months old for entertainment training. Decades of human interaction had created an animal caught between two worlds, neither fully wild nor completely domesticated. Recent behavioral assessments noted increased agitation and territorial displays, particularly around unfamiliar humans. At approximately 2:30 in the afternoon, Hart positioned herself 3 feet from Caesar's enclosure gate while her cameraman filmed from a safe distance. The sanctuary owner had stepped away to handle feeding schedules for other animals. Hart began her scripted questions, treating Caesar as an interview subject. Caesar initially appeared calm, sitting near the enclosure's front. Without warning, the 120-pound chimpanzee lunged forward, his powerful arms reaching through the chain-link barrier. His hands seized Hart's left arm and shoulder, pulling her against the fence with tremendous force. The impact created a metallic rattling that echoed across the compound. Hart's screams pierced the desert air as Caesar's grip tightened. His fingers, each possessing the strength of a human arm, crushed muscle and bone. The chimpanzee's canine teeth, measuring over an inch long, punctured Hart's shoulder and upper arm repeatedly. Blood began flowing through the chain-link openings. Caesar then grabbed Hart's head with both hands, his fingers wrapping around her skull. The crushing pressure fractured her temporal bone, while his thumbs pressed into her eye sockets. Hart's body convulsed as Caesar shook her violently against the fence, her neck snapping back and forth with each movement. The cameraman's frantic calls for help brought the sanctuary owner running, but Caesar's attack continued for nearly 4 minutes. The chimpanzee's powerful jaws clamped down on Hart's face, his teeth penetrating her cheek and jaw. Bone fragments mixed with tissue as Caesar's bite force, measuring 1,300 pounds per square inch, destroyed her facial structure. Hart's body went limp as massive blood loss and traumatic brain injury from the skull crushing proved fatal. Caesar finally released his grip, retreating to the back of his enclosure while Hart's lifeless form remained pressed against the fence. Emergency responders arrived within 12 minutes but could only pronounce Hart deceased at the scene. The Riverside County Sheriff's Department launched an investigation into safety protocols at the facility. Caesar was immediately quarantined pending evaluation by animal behavior specialists. Hart's family released a brief statement expressing their devastation while requesting privacy during their grief. The documentary project was permanently shelved, and the sanctuary implemented new safety measures, including increased barrier distances and mandatory supervision during all human-animal interactions. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.